Okay, so we live in this world that's just absolutely drowning in data.
Completely. Everywhere you look.
Every meeting, every new field you try to learn, maybe switching careers. It feels like a tsunami of information coming at you.
Mm-hmm.
And what's the single biggest challenge now? I mean, it's not really finding the info anymore, is it? That part's almost too easy sometimes.
No, the real trick, the hard part, is knowing how to actually process it all, how to understand it, and then crucially, how to communicate what you know effectively.
Especially the complex stuff. Efficiently, too.
That's exactly right. So maybe you're a language learner trying to really get the hang of professional English,
Or maybe you're a professional prepping for some high-stakes presentation.
or even someone thinking about switching industries entirely. Just having the facts, well, it isn't quite enough, is it?
No. You need something more.
You need that analytical shortcut, the way to synthesize all that complexity and become truly well-informed. You really need mastery over the structure of your thinking.
And that's our mission today, isn't it?
Hmm.
We want to give you that shortcut.
Mm-hmm.
We're doing a deep dive into the absolute foundations of clear thought and powerful communication. We're calling it smart thinking.
And it's not some abstract philosophy class.
No, not at all. It's about taking that sometimes messy, intuitive way we think
Yeah, the way we naturally reason.
and making it precise. Making reasoning a conscious, really effective act of communication. Welcome to the English Learning Podcast.
And I'm here to help guide us through that synthesis, spotting the patterns, explaining exactly why these, let's call them analytical blueprints.
Blueprints, I like that.
Yeah, why these structures of thought are just key. Key to boosting your confidence, speeding up your learning, and really nailing your professional goals.
Okay, let's unpack this then. Smart thinking. When we talk about that, we're not saying you suddenly need like a higher IQ or something, right? What's the core idea here?
Well, the key insight is that smart thinking isn't really about becoming a fundamentally different person. It's much more about improving the analytical skills you already have.
Oh.
By becoming explicitly aware of the processes, the thinking steps involved in reasoning. I mean, you already reason every single day, all the time.
Right, it's automatic.
Exactly. But what we're doing is providing the formal tools to help you gain control over that process, refine it, and then communicate it with real precision.
I like that distinction, being explicitly aware. That really takes reasoning out of that kind of fuzzy gut feeling zone and puts it firmly into, well, a structured, repeatable skill, something you can actually learn and teach like a professional tool.
And, at its core, smart thinking takes the best bits of informal logic, but marries them to this really crucial modern insight.
Okay, so
Reasoning and analysis, there are always communicative acts. You're not just structuring ideas in your own head for yourself.
right, you're doing it for an audience.
Always. Whether that audience is a client or your colleagues or maybe an examiner marking your work, that structural soundness, it has to be visible on the outside.
Okay, so let's get specific then. For our listeners, the ambitious professional, the person changing careers, the deep learner, why should they really focus on this structured approach?
Hey.
You mentioned 3 big areas of application. Yeah, 3 immediate pillars, let's say.
Yeah.
The first one is fundamental for study and learning. Okay.
So if you're trying to get your head around a complex academic subject or maybe a new technical skill or even navigating a new language context for business.
Which many of our listeners are doing.
Exactly. Smart thinking helps you cut through all the noise. It helps you really understand the context, grasp those underlying concepts, and crucially, deliver the reasoned explanations and arguments that teachers, mentors, bosses, they're all looking for that.
It's the difference between just, say, memorizing vocabulary and actually understanding the complex ideas that vocabulary is trying to describe. The ability to contextualize is huge. It's a real competitive edge. Then the second pillar, this one probably hits closer to home for anyone in a workplace, for work and professional life.
Yeah. Tell us about that.
Well, just look at what most of your day involves at work. It's mainly about making decisions, right?
Constantly.
Finding better ways to do things, solving complex problems. You're using reasoning all the time to deal with ambiguity, to initiate change.
So if you can make that reasoning process more formal, more smart.
You gain undeniable confidence, and your proposals, your ideas, they just succeed more often because they're structurally sound. People can see the logic.
And that ties into the third pillar, doesn't it? The communication part.
Directly, the communication edge. Because clarity equals influence. Simple as that.
Right.
Smart thinking gives you the structures to communicate more effectively. especially when you're dealing with, information overload, or you need to synthesize complex data for stakeholders who just don't have time for rambling explanations. If your argument structure is clear right away, you save everyone time and you build trust.
Exactly.
Okay, so let's dig into the core mechanism. This sounds really analytical now. The source talks about reasoning itself. How is that defined?
It's defined as a process of understanding and exploring the relationships between different things, events, objects, ideas.
That sounds surprisingly simple, but profound.
It really is, because we tend to think of things, objects, or ideas as having meaning just by themselves.
Yeah, inherent meaning.
But reasoning reminds us that nothing, no object, no event, no idea is truly meaningful in isolation. Meaning only gets constructed in relation to other things.
You give an example.
Yeah.
Sure, the classic simple one, an apple and an orange. They look different, taste different, feel different, completely different things.
But reasoning is the process that connects them. It explores their similarities, their differences, and ultimately classifies them together as, say, pieces of fruit.
Ah, okay. Finding the connection.
It's that constant finding and expressing of those connections, those interconnections, that actually builds knowledge.
That makes abstract ideas feel much more relatable. It's like you're building a solid web of meaning, not just piling up unrelated facts.
Precisely.
And, we know that taking on new challenges like switching careers or diving into a really complex new field, it can feel genuinely overwhelming sometimes.
Absolutely.
But maybe by learning to analyze and structure your thoughts using this kind of system, you gain real, tangible confidence in your abilities. Because you're not just guessing about your own logic anymore.
You're applying a proven blueprint, a structure.
Yeah, a blueprint.
And that confidence, it's invaluable, whether you're presenting to a boardroom or trying to break through language barriers in a new market.
Okay, this is great. We need to get into the actual building blocks next.
We do, the claims themselves.
But first, just a quick reminder, if you appreciate this idea of cutting through the noise and getting right to the core of critical thinking, please do like, share, and subscribe so you never miss one of our deep dives.
Welcome back. Okay, so if reasoning is the overall architectural plan, the fundamental building block, that individual structured unit of thought, is what we call the claim.
Right, the claim. Now, when we use the word claim in just everyday chat, it often implies there's some doubt, maybe some bias, like something needs proving.
It often does.
But how does smart thinking define it analytically? Is it different?
Analytically, yes, it's broader. A claim is simply a statement that expresses a belief or a view about the way the world is.
Right.
Or the way the world should be. And here's the first point that really requires some rigor, some careful thought.
What's that?
All those statements we usually think of as hard, objective facts. Analytically speaking, they are still claims.
Really? Even facts?
Yes. They're simply claims whose truth has been so widely, so rigorously accepted that they just seem different in common usage.
So if I say the Earth orbits the sun, which is, scientifically undeniable, I'm still making what we have to call analytically a claim.
Correct.
It doesn't magically transform into a non-claim just because it's proven true.
No, it remains a claim whose truth is established.
Why is that distinction so important for this kind of smart thinking?
It's crucial because remembering its status as a claim forces us to remember that it's always, in principle, testable, subject to scrutiny, even if the chance of it being overturned is incredibly remote.
Ah, okay. Keeps us analytically honest.
Exactly. And it means we must always understand the structure and the properties internal to that claim, because those properties dictate how we can use it in reasoning later on.
Okay. So to understand the strength of any argument, we first need to get the properties of the claims right. You said there are 3 crucial ones.
Yes. 3 crucial internal properties. Let's walk through them.
Okay, starting with the internal structure itself.
Right. The first property is the internal connection. Every valid claim has to contain a necessary internal link between 2 or more ideas. Usually, a subject and a predicate.
Okay. This internal link is fundamental. It underpins all the external links we're going to make later when we build arguments. Think about the claim. Drinking milk makes some people feel sick. Got it.
The internal connection is between drinking milk and the consequence makes some people feel sick. That connection is the claim. If we separate those ideas, if they're not internally coherent,
The whole thing falls apart.
the statement collapses. It just can't function as a building block for reasoning.
So that's like the structural integrity check for each brick
Yeah.
before you even think about using it to build a wall.
Perfect analogy.
Yeah.
You need that internal coherence before you can logically connect it externally to another idea. For example, arguing that because milk makes some people sick, claim one, our premise,
Right.
it is therefore important to mandate clear labeling for lactose-intolerant products, claim two, our conclusion. You need claim one to be solid first.
Makes sense. What's the second property?
The second is scope and certainty. Clear, effective claims must include, or at least very strongly imply, some indication of their scope and their certainty.
Scope and certainty. Explain those.
Scope defines the extent of the claim. It uses qualifiers like sometimes, whenever, occasionally, or maybe in 85% of cases. It tells you how broadly the claim applies.
Okay, and certainty. Certainty defines the probability. How sure are we? Using phrases like it's probable, highly unlikely, definitely, or maybe 50.50. Okay. And this is where a lot of professional communication falls down, isn't it? People make these big, unqualified statements.
Constantly. They lack analytical rigor. If a business analyst just says, we will increase market share, well, that's actually a poorly qualified claim.
So a smarter claim would be,
It is highly probable certainty that we will increase market share by approximately 10% scope within the next 2 quarters.
much better, more precise.
Thinking clearly means appropriately limiting or qualifying your claims. You're stating what you know, but just as importantly, you're signaling what you don't know or what the boundaries are. If you fail to define that scope and certainty clearly.
You're opening yourself up to easy criticism.
Immediate and easy rebuttal.
Exactly. Okay, and the third property. You mentioned distinguishing between two types of claims. Yes, descriptive versus value claims. Descriptive claims state what is. These are often about observable facts, data. This office building uses 20% less energy than the average facility. Fact-based. Okay. Value claims state what ought to be or what should be done. They reflect priorities, judgments, desired outcomes. We should prioritize analytical training for all new hires. More about judgment or opinion.
Well, crucially, value claims can't strictly be judged as true or false in the same way descriptive claims can. We judge them based on whether they seem reasonable or justifiable, often based on descriptive claims.
And sometimes claims look descriptive but sneak in a value judgment.
Very often. Like calling a budget reckless or a strategy conservative, those words carry an implicit judgment based on some assumed norm or value. You need to watch out for those.
Okay, so those are the explicit statements, the claims.
Yeah.
What about the implicit stuff? Assumptions. You mentioned these are dangerous. Why?
Well, assumptions are those implicit ideas or values we just take for granted. The danger isn't necessarily that the assumption itself is wrong. Sometimes they're perfectly correct.
So what's the danger then?
The danger is that they are not consciously considered and tested. They operate under the radar. In a business context, think of assumptions like filters.
Filters? How so?
If you just assume, say, your entire customer base is digitally native, you might filter out or ignore any data suggesting some prefer non-digital interactions.
Ah, I see. You don't even see the conflicting information.
Right. Smart thinkers are constantly assessing their frameworks, their filters, not just the facts that happen to get through those filters.
But hang on, in really high-pressure situations or fast-moving industries, don't you sometimes have to rely on assumptions just to make a decision and move forward quickly?
Well, you have to rely on hypotheses, yes. But the key difference is those hypotheses should be identified as such and marked down for future testing or verification.
Okay, so acknowledge them.
Yes. It's the unexamined assumptions, the ones we don't even realize we're making, that are truly risky. They can perpetuate errors, biases across whole teams or even organizations.
That 19th century Australian example you mentioned before, but the bogeyman, that really illustrates this point, doesn't it?
It's a chillingly effective example, yes. The cultural context where kids were warned the black bogeyman would get them if they misbehaved.
So the intention was maybe just to manage behavior, perhaps. But the effect was creating this deeply embedded unconscious association in the children's minds. Blacks, meaning indigenous Australians, then equals danger. An untested, assumed connection.
Exactly, a structural assumption.
Yeah.
And when those children grew up, they often continue to think and act in racist ways, relying on that embedded mental link without ever questioning it.
Wow. So it shows how these unexamined assumptions can literally guide reasoning, conclusions, even policy and law for generations.
Just because the underlying connection, the assumption, was never brought out into the open and challenged. It really highlights the power of context in driving our reasoning. And that's why we absolutely must try to bring assumptions to the surface.
Okay, so we've checked our individual claims, their internal structure, scope, type. Now the next big challenge is how we connect them together, right, without the whole structure collapsing.
Exactly. If claims are the bricks, now we need the mortar and the blueprint. We move to linking, which is what turns isolated claims into actual reasoning, into arguments.
Let's start with the roles claims can play within an argument.
Okay. When one claim is used to support or explain another claim, it takes on the role of a premise.
A premise, like the foundation.
Sorta, yes. And conversely, the claim we're trying to establish, the one we're arguing for or trying to explain, that's the conclusion.
The endpoint of the argument.
And crucially, the conclusion has to be a new statement. It has to go beyond what's already stated in the premises. It can't just be a summary or a simple rephrasing.
Got it. And the key thing for listeners here is that these roles, premise, conclusion, they're flexible, aren't they?
Entirely flexible. Any single claim could serve as a premise in one argument and then turn around and be the conclusion in a different argument.
So it's all determined by the purpose of the reasoning act at that specific moment. Context is everything again.
Context defines the function, yes. Now, when we communicate normally, in natural language, like the smooth narrative flow of a report or a speech or even just an email,
Yeah, the way we usually talk and write.
we can't actually see the analytical process of linking directly. It's hidden beneath the surface. We can only infer it indirectly.
How? What do we look for?
We look for what the source calls traces of reasoning.
Traces of reasoning, like little clues.
Exactly. Signal flares, as you put it earlier. These are the key link words and phrases like because, therefore, so. This means that, consequently, as a result, since.
Oh, okay. So if I'm trying to convince my boss and I say the Q4 result exceeded targets, which means that we should authorize the expansion budget.
There it is, which means that.
That phrase signals that authorizing the budget is my conclusion, and it's supported by the Q4 results exceeded targets premise.
Perfect. And the presence of those link words is absolutely essential because the demands of natural language, the need for prose to be readable and flow nicely, can often completely obscure the underlying analytical structure.
How so?
Well, things like pronouns, it, they, or shifts in topic or implicit references back to earlier points, they can make it really confusing, really fast to see exactly which idea is supporting which conclusion.
Which is why smart thinking insists on using the analytical structure, the blueprint, as we called it.
Yes. For any kind of complex thinking or communication, we really must translate that potentially messy narrative flow into a clear formal structure.
Which involves what, exactly?
Typically, a list of numbered claims clearly identifying each premise and the final conclusion, and often an accompanying diagram showing the relationships with arrows.
And why is this step seen as mandatory, not just optional?
Because the analytical structure forces simplification and clarity. It's invaluable when you're synthesizing a lot of data or dealing with a complex issue, especially for critical stakeholders.
How does it force clarity?
It strips away all the confusing shorthand, the pronouns, the rhetorical flourishes, the implicit cross-referencing. It makes you clearly define which specific premises lead to which specific conclusion. If you find you can't map your argument clearly onto that diagram,
Then your argument probably has structural weaknesses you need to fix.
exactly, you found a flaw in your reasoning.
And the diagram itself, it has rules, right?
Yeah.
You mentioned the conclusion is always at the bottom.
Yes, that's the standard convention.
Yeah.
The conclusion is positioned at the bottom, visually symbolizing that the premises, which are arrayed above it, logically flow down and lead to or support that final point.
Like a cascade of logic.
Precisely. Take that complex argument about internet censorship mentioned in the source material. In narrative form, it might take a whole paragraph full of connecting phrases.
Right, but the analytical structure boils it down. Claim 1, internet has no single regulator. Plus claim 3, it's a new medium open to anyone. Plus claim 5, children can access it. All independently point towards the conclusion. Children will inevitably view violent material. So the list and the diagram with arrows become the analytical proof.
They're the blueprint of the logic. If those logical lines don't hold up when you draw the diagram, the argument fails, no matter how convincingly the original written prose might have hidden the flaw.
This is powerful stuff.
Okay.
This leads us naturally to the purpose of the conclusion itself. Smart thinking means tailoring the conclusion to what you're actually trying to achieve with your reasoning, right?
Absolutely. The source identifies 3 main conclusion purposes depending on the outcome you're aiming for.
That's the first one.
First is prediction. This type of conclusion is inherently about the future, or maybe the unobserved past, which means it's always to some degree doubtful.
So it needs strong support. It requires strong premises to make it plausible. In a business context, this is your forecasting report, your market prediction. For example, the global market for microchips will continue to shrink. Conclusion because of ongoing trade disputes and high commodity costs premises. Ah, okay. Arguing probability based on current data. Makes sense. What's second?
Second is an appeal to action. This conclusion isn't predicting something. It's designed specifically to convince people to do something, to change a policy, adopt a new belief, buy a product.
Ah, so this is the sales pitch, the policy proposal, the marketing brief. Exactly. The conclusion is the call to change behavior or thought. For instance, we should immediately reallocate R&D spending to sustainable technology conclusion because the strategy best aligns with anticipated future consumer demand and also reduces regulatory risk premises.
Got it.
And the third type?
Third is explanation or justification. Now, in this case, the conclusion is something that's already known or generally accepted as fact. The premises aren't trying to prove the conclusion is true. They're explaining why it happened or justifying it.
Okay, so this is like the post-mortem analysis after a project or maybe a performance review explaining results. Precisely. For example, the Q2 results were substantially lower than projected conclusion, already known because previous governments were blind to the consequences of supply chain centralization. Premise the explanation. The purpose isn't to prove the low results happened, but to explain the cause, maybe provide justification for a future change in policy. So mastering these three conclusion types, prediction, action, explanation, is really about mastering how to position your analysis for maximum impact in whatever situation you're in.
That's the core idea, tailoring the structure to the communicative goal. Okay, so now we need to shift gears slightly. We've talked about making reasoning sound, meaning structurally correct according to the rule.
Right, getting the blueprint right.
Now we need to talk about making reasoning effective, which means making it compelling, comprehensive, and genuinely difficult to refute.
Going beyond just correct to actually persuasive and robust.
Exactly. We need to explore concepts like depth, relevance, and the whole social context of argument. Let's start with achieving depth through dependent premises.
Okay. We touched on this. When we state a reason for something, it often feels like a single idea. But you're saying for complex topics, a single claim is rarely enough support. It needs unpacking.
Yes. Analytically, that single reason often needs to be broken down into a chain of dependent premises that rely on each other. And in our diagrams, we link these together using the plus symbol.
Dependent premises linked to the plus. What's the key insight there?
The insight is that complex arguments require this kind of cross-linking. The individual dependent premises, on their own, often can't fully support the conclusion. They need to work together. They rely on each other to establish the full weight of the argument.
Could you give an example of that chain?
Sure. Think about the argument for protecting Australia's natural environment. The simple, top-level reason might just be, well, it benefits the national economy.
Okay, but that feels a bit superficial on its own. How do we give that depth? We unpack it. We break it down into a chain of dependent claims, all linked by that plus sign. So, maybe. A, the Australian environment possesses unique natural beauty, plus B. This unique natural beauty attracts significant international tourism. Plus, C, international tourism substantially benefits the national economy. Plus, D, things that significantly benefit the national economy should be protected by the government. Wow, okay. That's much more detailed.
You see, you need that entire chain of 4 dependent premises. They're all cross-linking internal ideas. Beauty links to tourism, tourism links to economy, economy links to the value of protection. And it's that whole chain working together that establishes the final, powerful value claim: we should protect the environment.
Yeah. That detailed unpacking is precisely what gives the argument its intellectual depth. And it makes it much harder for someone to just dismiss it easily. Within those dependent chains, you also mentioned a special role for something called the framing premise. Yes, framing premises are vital, because quite often one premise in a dependent chain serves a special function. It provides the general rule. Usually it's a value claim, a general rule. What does it do?
It essentially shows why the specific, often descriptive evidence presented in the other premises actually relates to the conclusion. It provides the context or the value system.
Okay, maybe an example. Sure. Let's say you're arguing for more government funding for the education system. Your specific evidence premise might be, Australia's education system is vital to the future well-being of the nation. Okay, that sounds like a reasonable descriptive claim.
But that specific evidence by itself doesn't automatically compel the conclusion, therefore we must fund it more. Not unless we accept an underlying value.
So the framing premise provides that value. Exactly. The framing premise would be the general rule, like, if something is vital to the future well-being of the nation, then it must be properly funded by the government.
Hmm.
Okay, I see. The specific claim about education's importance is then framed within that general value system about what vital national assets deserve funding.
Precisely. And that gives the argument its logical force. But notice if your audience doesn't accept your framing premise, if they reject that underlying value.
Yeah, then your conclusion collapses, even if they agree with your specific facts about education being important.
Your argument fails to persuade them, yes, because the logical bridge provided by the framing premise isn't accepted. Identifying and sometimes explicitly stating these framing premises is crucial.
Okay, that's depth. Now let's move on to what you call the critical skill of establishing relevance. This sounds like where many arguments might subtly go wrong.
It's a very common failure point, including claims that, while perhaps true, simply don't matter to the conclusion being drawn.
So how do we define relevance analytically?
A premise is relevant if, assuming it's true, it provides some basis, some reason, however small, for accepting the conclusion as more likely or more necessary.
Okay, and if it doesn't, then it's irrelevant, even if it's factually correct. The classic silly example, arguing that your colleague, Smith, is physically unhealthy, and your premises are he wears a pink hat and he drives an electric car. Those premises might be true.
They might be perfectly true, but they are completely irrelevant to the conclusion about his physical health. They provide zero basis for accepting that conclusion.
Right. But the critical insight here, for our listeners, is that relevance isn't some inherent quality of the premise itself, is it?
No, not at all. It's entirely contextual. It's defined purely by its relationship to the specific conclusion being argued for in that moment.
So using your Smith example, if the conclusion was different, say that Smith has questionable fashion sense,
Then suddenly the pink hat premise becomes highly relevant, and maybe even the electric car, depending on the context and assumptions about fashion.
Okay. Relevance depends entirely on what you're trying to prove.
Exactly. And this contextual nature of relevance is why so many high-stakes public debates think about complex international trade laws or really contentious social issues like refugee treatment.
Yeah.
They often hinge not really on whether the basic descriptive facts are true. Everyone might agree on the facts. The real argument is about whether competing parties agree on the relevance of certain facts or certain laws or certain conditions within that specific legal or cultural context. So smart thinking requires constantly asking that question. How exactly does this piece of information, this premise, make my conclusion more likely or more necessary? What's the link? You have to explicitly trace that connection. If you can't articulate the relevance, the premise probably shouldn't be there. That connection between relevance and context, it brings us to something you touched on earlier. This idea that knowledge isn't purely objective. You called it intersubjectivity.
Yes.
It's the idea that knowledge, meaning understanding, it's often created between people, between authors and audiences, speakers and listeners, is shared, negotiated.
Which means, even if your logic is perfectly sound by the rules we've discussed,
Your perfectly structured argument, yes.
it can still fail. If you haven't understood the context, the assumptions, the values of the person receiving it.
It absolutely can fail to persuade or convince, yes, because they might not accept your framing premises, or they might consider different facts relevant based on their own context and background.
That feels like a really important bridge to the social dimension of reasoning. It's not just a technical exercise.
It's fundamentally social, which leads us to concepts like the burden of proof and the need for breadth in your reasoning.
Okay, burden of proof. What does that mean in practice?
In any kind of structured debate, or even just a professional presentation where you're proposing something new, one side usually carries a heavier burden, a tougher job to prove their point.
And who usually has the heavier burden?
Generally, it falls on those who are challenging the existing conclusions or established industry standards or maybe widely held community beliefs. The status quo, the existing way of doing things, typically requires less justification to maintain.
So if you're the one proposing the radical new strategy, you need a much stronger, more compelling case than the person defending the current strategy.
You need stronger evidence, clearer links, more robust reasoning, yes. You have a higher bar to clear.
And to successfully meet that higher burden, you need what you called breadth.
Yes, breadth means avoiding the very common trap of oversimplification, especially when you're advocating for something.
So don't just focus on the positives.
Exactly. You can't just highlight the potential benefits of your proposal. You absolutely must also address the known counterarguments, the potential downsides, and all the relevant implications.
Give me an example.
Well, if you're arguing for, say, a major corporate merger, you can't just talk about the economic benefits or market share. You must also address the potential cultural clashes between the companies, the impact on employees, potential layoffs, future regulatory hurdles.
You have to cover all the bases.
You have to demonstrate breadth. Failure to address all the relevant known issues makes your reasoning seem ineffective. It makes you look either naive, maybe incompetent, or possibly even manipulative because you seem to be deliberately ignoring known complications or objections.
So the most effective reasoning
Yeah.
actually anticipates the counterarguments.
It anticipates and proactively frames or refutes the counterarguments, often before the audience even has a chance to raise them. That builds huge credibility.
Okay, finally, the source warns about 2 specific major analytical flaws we need to avoid if we want our reasoning to be taken seriously. Yes, 2 big ones to watch out for. Circular reasoning and making sweeping generalizations. Circular reasoning, it's all circular.
It is. It's subtle but deadly to an argument. It basically means your premise is logically identical to your conclusion, you've just used different words. You haven't actually provided any independent support.
Like what?
Like arguing, the new marketing strategy is highly effective conclusion because it is very successful at delivering results premise.
Ah, successful at delivering results just means effective.
Exactly. You haven't made a logical step forward. You've just offered a synonym. It proves nothing. This happens a lot, actually, when people rely too heavily on jargon or buzzwords that kind of mask a lack of real substantive reasoning underneath.
Right, you need to watch out for that.
Right.
And the other one, sweeping generalization.
This one connects back directly to scope and certainty, which we discussed earlier.
Yeah.
A sweeping generalization is making a conclusion that is far too definitive or far too general for the limited premises you've actually provided.
So the conclusion overreaches the evidence.
Precisely. Claiming that because, say, our specific region has a good education system, therefore, all residents in this region have high literacy rates. That's likely a sweeping generalization.
Why?
Because it ignores potential variations, specific communities within the region, individuals with learning difficulties, maybe socioeconomic factors that affect literacy despite good schools overall.
So the conclusion's scope, all residents, and certainty have high literacy, don't align with the likely more limited scope and certainty of the supporting evidence about the system itself.
Exactly. You've fundamentally compromised your analytical integrity by overstating your case. Your conclusion must align precisely with the strength and scope of your premises. #outro.
Wow, okay. We have really unpacked this smart thinking framework today, haven't we?
We've covered a lot of ground.
Moving from checking those individual claims, their properties, their types, then linking them together with real structural depth and breadth.
Using premises and conclusions correctly.
And then constantly checking for relevance, understanding the burden of proof, avoiding those big flaws like circularity or generalizations.
It's a journey from that sometimes messy narrative flow of everyday thought.
Yeah, to the kind of precision you get from that analytical blueprint, the structure.
Yeah.
It can feel rigorous, maybe even a bit daunting at first.
It can. But that willingness to actually reflect on and analyze your own thought processes, that really is the core of professional growth and intellectual success, isn't it?
It seems like it.
And remember, this isn't just about learning a technique, it's almost an attitude change. Your investment in learning to think about structure like this, it will give you tangible returns, real payback and clarity and influence.
And confidence too, presumably.
Huge confidence, precisely because you're no longer relying on those hidden, unexamined assumptions. You have a formal, repeatable way to test the soundness of your own logic.
And crucially, the logic you encounter from others too.
Yes, absolutely.
So if you're a language learner out there, working hard on your communication skills, or maybe you're a professional looking to upskill, or just someone seeking real mastery in a complex field, this analytical clarity, this focus on structure, it really does seem like your most powerful competitive advantage. Keep challenging those assumptions.
Definitely.
And of course, remember to like, share, and subscribe to keep these deep dives coming your way. Now, we established something really important today, that even a perfectly logical argument structure, one that follows every rule we've discussed,
Yeah.
it can still fail. It can fall flat if you miss the context, if you don't understand the person or the group who's receiving your argument. Because knowledge, as we said, is often created intersubjectively between people.
Right. That social dimension is inescapable.
It is.
So we want to leave you with a final provocative question. Something to maybe mull over as you approach your next big presentation or negotiation or even just a difficult conversation.
Okay, what is it? What cultural, social, or historical assumptions are you perhaps unconsciously making about your audience, your colleagues, or your professional peers? That might cause them to quite rationally reject your otherwise perfectly logical conclusion.